Hello, Dr. Thompson here. Welcome to week three. And week three, we're going to look at chapters 5 and 6 in this conflict resolution, management. I hope things are going well for you this summer and that you're getting something out of this. I'll talk later about a couple of papers that you have due. I think one at this point. There should be one that's due early on conflict. But I want you to write a paper about these 5 stages of conflict or resolution of conflict. That's competing, accommodating, compromising, collaborating. So we'll have more about that, but please look at that. But in chapter 5, we really talk about adopting strategies. What are the conflict strategies? There are partisan goals that it talks about on page 117. But there's also consensual conflict, and that's the possibility of trade-off between issues and contentions with different priorities makes negotiation. Even problem-solving negotiations feasible and often attractive, particularly when common interests and values are recognized. So there are consensual conflicts that we have conflicts, but nothing means that we can't work through that. On page 120, it talks about having predispositions. And when you look at this, it does make sense because you probably have spoken with people from various backgrounds. For whatever reason, they say, hey, this is the way we solve our problems down here. This is how we deal with conflict. But that's not how we deal with them here, you know. You might have a relative that stay in another part of the country, in another household. And they come visit you over the summer and they go, hey, when we have an issue on who's going first, we duke it out. You go, well, we don't do that over here. I mean, we talk about it and compromise with it. So predisposition means that you are predisposed to it, or your background, you've leaned to that. That's the way you think about it. So that's what you believe to be right. You're predisposed to it. And there's also on 124, it talks about group ideology. So even as a group, there could be conflict that go against other groups. I'm sure we've seen that. Not just talking about gangs, but it's just talking about people and how we get along or not get along. There's various ways that we rile up things against another group of people. Certainly not Christ-like, but it is something that we have to recognize. And oftentimes we recognize these things in other people because we see them. It's a lot more difficult to see them in me that I'm doing the same thing and maybe even worse. So as you go through this conflict management and resolution, I'm inviting you to look at yourself. There's a balance between adversaries on page 135. It says abundance of resources, a conflict party may has available as possible inducements relative to his adversary affects not only the emergence of a conflict, but the choice of the strategy they would use. If you have something that somebody else wants or even needs, and you have a conflict, you could use that particular thing to sort of get what you want from it. Chapter 5, you can read through that. It's not a whole lot there. Chapter 6 is. It talks about the escalation of conflict. There are dimensions of escalations, it says on 147. He says there are 2 factors that are particularly salient to the escalation of social conflict. So there's 2 things that salient means that it's important to know. The first is the intensity of coercion or non-coercive inducements used by one or both sides to wage a conflict. So an inducement says, I have this issue and I'm going to suck you into it, right? It could be coercive, which means I'm going to beat you over the head with it, or I'm going to be sneaky about getting you into it. Increased severity of coercion can take many forms. For instance, one or more sides may make greater threats or execute harsher sanctions to get to it. The second way, on page 148, the second dimension of escalation is escalation may also occur when more people become engaged in a struggle or impacted by it. We often do that when we align ourselves. There's a conflict between me and you, and what do? I go try to tell people to get people on my side. Chapter Chapter 6, Table 6.1 on 149 gives an illustration of the component, and then it says you can do things to make it more destructive or more constructive. So, for an example, let's just jump down to grievance there. To make something more destructive, you would believe that the existence threatens people, and you start spreading it. If we don't do something about this, it's going to get you too. You feel humiliated by others. You know, somebody did something to you that caused you embarrassment or historical trauma. This may have happened not just to you, but maybe to your ancestors. And then, so to keep conjuring those things up makes it more destructive and there's more conflict. To make it more constructive, even with grievances, believe that the existence is not a threat anymore. It's just a belief that I mentally go through. The issue appears to be negotiable versus feeling humiliated. I can go through negotiate that. So there are things that we can do, and it's not just this, but anything. I like page 151. It talks about emotions. It says emotions also play a significant role in the development of the struggles that are protracted or destructive. Fear, anxiety, anger are likely to be aroused when people feel attacked, or the tendency to express emotions by inflicting harm by the presumed attacker certainly contributes to the conflict being escalated. No question about that. The prisoner dilemma. I want you to read through that. It's a very interesting on the prisoner's dilemma. If you hadn't heard it, you will hear about it. But I want you to read about it. That's not going to tell you much about it. It's going to be a question somewhere down the line for you. Just the issues of contention and internal development. Again, things that we go through internally when we're dealing with conflict and the resolution of conflict. That's chapters 5 and 6, everyone. And I'll introduce 7 and 8 to you next week. Until then, God bless you.